Welcome to the Advisor Club podcast, hosted by Paul Hewitt and Steve Rumsey from Optimus Advisory Group. On this podcast, we discuss ideas to transform your clients into your advocates through better human understanding and connection, and through improved financial and economic acumen.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on the Advisor Club podcast. This is episode 5. I'm Paul Hewitt, president of Optimus Advisory Group, joined today by my chief investment officer, Steve Rumsey. How you doing today, Steve?
Great.
Today, we are going to be reviewing just a terrific book. I think it might be one of the most impactful books that I've listened to. I'm sure you'd agree, Steve. It's called Never Split the Difference. It's by Chris Voss. He is a former FBI negotiator, has a lot of wisdom and that he shares throughout the book. It really gives a lot of great clues and tips on how to deal with clients, how to turn prospects into clients. And there's also some techniques in terms of, dealing with negotiating situations that you may find yourself in throughout life. So let's go ahead and hop right into the book. Now, the first thing I noticed about the book was the title, Never Split the Difference. That's a saying that I've heard before. I think I've used it before, but what does it really mean? And Chris gives a great analogy, and that would be, let's suppose you and your wife, you're getting ready for a big night out, and it's a formal occasion. You put on your suit. You're getting ready to go, and the decision comes down to shoes. Should I wear my black shoes or should I wear my brown shoes with this particular suit? It's a pretty simple question. It's a pretty common situation. And so, you decide, maybe I'll ask my wife and see what she thinks, even though, in your mind, you're leaning towards wearing the black shoes because that's kind of your preference. But you think, you know what, I'll throw her a bone in this case, let her be a part of the decision, see what she has to say. So you ask her and she says, brown shoes. Okay, so you want black shoes, she wants brown shoes. If you split the difference, what happens? You wear one black shoe and one brown shoe, right? Like, does that really work? In that instance, everybody loses, right? You're not happy, she's not happy, and it looks weird. Okay, so in a negotiation, you can't just necessarily split the difference and have everybody be happy. Typically, what's going to happen in those situations is both parties are going to be unhappy, right? There is some middle ground and some give and take for sure, but if you just split things right in half, it doesn't always work out the way you might think it will. Does that ring a bell to you, Steve? Does that bring up any thoughts or any stories?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love the book, like you said, and this book was recommended to me by a friend I've had for 40 years. And he had used the techniques and he told me about all the stories where he had negotiated better terms for a loan, buying a car, better price. He'd done all these things. He really took it to heart and just explained it. I'm like, man, I got to get this book. So yeah, I mean, with me, this is a book where the beginning chapter was so powerful right out of the gate. I listened to it, an audio book, and then I read the book a couple times, and I was just blown away by his story. And I could share his story right now. He was top negotiator, like Paul said, with the FBI, started his own private consulting practice, but he got invited to Harvard to speak at the Harvard School of Counterterrorism and Negotiations. And the head of the department had him come into his office and said, first thing right out of his mouth, Chris, we have your son and we're going to kill him unless you pay us $1 million. That's what the professor said right out of the gate. And
Trying to trap him.
yeah. And so he took a breath And he kept using what we're going to talk about in the book, these negotiation techniques. A big one being, how am I supposed to do that when they're saying we want $1 million, which puts the other party on their heels to say, oh, wait, I didn't think about that. And all of a sudden it's their problem they have to solve. And so anyway, he negotiates this with this professor. Another professor comes in that used to work for the IDF in Israel and is a negotiator from Israel. She comes in, sees he's getting flustered, so they tag team him. She takes place, and then she can't get anywhere with him either. And they go back and forth, just get all flustered, and he wins the the whole negotiation thing. And they're thinking this guy is amazing. But I just love how he uses these terms and these phrases and these techniques to get what he wants, because that's basically the whole purpose of the book, is to negotiate your way to get a better deal, better outcome. And all the while the person's thinking they're making the decisions. And it's basically a lot of human psychology that he's
Right.
using, and it's so effective because he's been working on it for decades.
Right. And I know one of the things that was pointed out early on was the Descartes's error book that was written that talked about emotion and how that plays a role in decision making. So there was an experiment done on, people who had brain damage in the area of the brain that controls emotions. And what they found, the unique finding was that they're unable to make simple decisions with that part of the brain damaged. So emotion does play an important role, probably more of a role than you would think in decision making. We like to think of decisions as being it's all logical and let's,
Right.
work our way through this. And you've probably most people listening have probably had training, industry training that taught them, how to logically work a client through the situation to get them to say yes, right? And that's not necessarily going to be your best way to deal with clients and your most effective way to get the types of outcomes that you're looking for, and that's going to help you and also help your client ultimately. So let's talk about that relationship, with clients. So if you and then we'll talk about, how to use some of these techniques with prospects and turning prospects into clients. So if we're talking about clients, when a client calls us, all right, is it is it typically good news or is it typically bad news, right? Are they calling because they want to congratulate you on how well you're managing their money and how great their account is doing? Or are they calling you because they're unhappy about something or maybe they need something, right? I would say most of the time it's they need something or they're unhappy about something. Okay. So they are calling you in with let's say negative emotion being prominent for them. Okay. So what you need to do in that situation to best deal with them is you need to establish rapport with them or build an understanding with them as to the fact that you understand what they're saying, you understand their problem, or you are listening to them. So, you know, they did a study with waiters and waitresses in restaurants, okay, for example. And what they figured out was those waiters that are rated the highest, that people felt like were the best waiters and waitresses, what they did was a simple technique. And that was they repeated the order back to the customer, right? So when somebody ordered a hamburger, uh, ketchup, lettuce, tomato, and fries, they repeated that back to them. The customer felt like, okay, this person's hearing me, right? They repeated it back to me. So they understand me. I like this person. Okay. And that builds that rapport. Okay. So a technique of mirroring, repeating back to somebody, maybe the last few words of a sentence that they're telling you, that shows that person that you are actively listening to them. Okay. And listening is a huge key, right? Because When somebody starts talking, you really want to close off that part of your brain that's telling you to start talking, right? And responding to them. And you really, really, really want to actively listen. That's going to help you. That's really the biggest key initially, is if you can listen well, repeat back to them some things that, they have said to you, then they'll feel like, okay, I'm understood, right? And that's step number one. That's going to take that negative emotion that they have, right, coming into the phone call, and help kind of alleviate that a little bit. Okay. The other thing that that's doing, right, is you are validating their feelings, right? So you want to show empathy. Okay. So one of the best techniques to do that is to use a phrase like sounds like. Okay. So if they come to you and they say, hey, my account is, we're only up 10% this year and the stock market's up 20%, what's going on? Okay. Well, you could just counter that and say, no, you're doing great. But that doesn't really help them, right? What you want to say instead is something like, I understand what you're saying. Your account is up 10% this year. It sounds to me like you're feeling like your returns aren't up to what everybody else is getting, or that you're missing out, right? So by repeating back to them, giving them an opportunity to say, yes, that's how I'm feeling. Okay. That gives them a chance to feel like they've been validated.
Right. And he goes on to talk about, if you label their negative feelings, you diffuse them. And if you label their positive feelings, you amplify them. So if they're coming in hot and it's a negative encounter, you can diffuse that by mirroring back to them. Sounds like what you're saying is this, because like Paul said, we all want to be understood, and we want to be acknowledged. And it kind of goes back to episode 2 about these different emotional states that we want, about the um, people being understood. They want to be acknowledged. They want their status to be acknowledged. They want their role to be acknowledged. We want all these things emotionally as humans. And so the more that you can use that while talking to clients or even prospects, the better outcomes you're going to have.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, there's dozens of examples in dealing with clients, over the years. I had somebody call me just the other day, and that was what they hit me with. It wasn't even a hello. It was, hey, this is so and so. How come our account is only up, or our account isn't keeping up with the S&P 500 this year? And it's like, whoa, okay. Now, an option I had is to answer the question. Well, your risk level is moderately conservative, so therefore, you're only 25 or 30% invested in stocks, and therefore, but that's just countering what they said. And so, yeah, I want to get that information out there and I want to make sure they understand that, but that's not the first thing that I reply with, right? I say, "Oh, I understand. So you're saying your account isn't keeping up. I see that, year to date, you're up 9%, and let's see, the stock market is up 25%. And so you're feeling like, you're not keeping up. Is that right?" And they say, "Yeah, that's exactly right." Okay. So now they feel like, okay, I was upset, but at least I'm heard, I'm validated. He understands what I'm saying. Paul gets me. He gets my feelings. And then now that his emotional level has reduced a little bit, it's receded a bit. He's a little bit calmer because now he's been validated. Now I can go about it explaining, okay, it has to do with the risk level that we're at and why we're at that risk level, right? And the pros and the cons to being in that situation. And then they can take in that information in let's say, a calmer mental state, right? They're more likely to accept that information that I provide to them.
Yeah. And you said the magic phrase, that, not to jump ahead, but we're going to get to that, but it's probably a good segue. You said the magic phrase the client said back to you when you explained, it sounds like you're saying this, this, and this, and this. And he said, that's right. That's the magic phrase. Because when we've talked to people, what you don't want them to say is, you're right, as you're explaining things, because what they're really saying is, just shut up. I don't want you talking anymore. If you say, yeah, you're right. Like you've had a you've had a friend or a parent when you're a kid say, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. And you're like, yeah, you're right. And it's just like your way of shutting down the conversation. That's right, is them acknowledging, like Paul said, you get me, because they want you to understand and acknowledge what they're feeling. And you just did all of that by getting them to say, that's right. And now you've laid out the red carpet to have this conversation go the right way, instead of them coming in hot. And you've changed the whole dynamic by getting them to say, that's right.
Yep. No, totally agree. And so again, ways to establish that rapport is actively listen, repeat back some of what you are told, right? Mirror, validate the feelings, use phrases like it sounds like. You want to restate what they're telling you so that they get the fact that you're listening and you understand, and you empathize with their situation, with their feelings. You validate them. So those are a couple of good techniques in terms of a client calling in, right? Calling you, and how you deal with that situation. Now, there's other times, right, where you are the one placing a call as the advisor, placing a call to the client. In that situation, a great way to get the client to feel like they're in control, or the prospect for that matter, is asking a question that results in you getting the answer no. So in other words, when you call up the client, you say, or the prospect, is this a bad time to talk? If they say no, then they are now in control, or they feel that they are in control, right? Because they've told you no. Since they told you no, now they feel again like, all right, everything's okay. I'm able to tell this person no, I'm relaxed. And you can go ahead and proceed and talk to them about what you want to talk to them about. If when you ask them, is this a bad time to talk, they say yes, well, then you can say, when would be a better time? And they can give you a specific time. And then they're in control of when that conversation takes place. And they're going to feel better about dealing with you and working with you and listening to you. So that technique is important. You can ask these questions to let the client or let the prospect have the feeling of being in control by actively seeking that no. And this is counter to a lot of training in the industry that says, hey, get your client to say yes, ask him like 6 or 7 questions in a row, get that head nodding up and down, yes,
Yep.
yes,
Yeah.
sign here, yes. It doesn't really work that way, right?
Yeah. And and I like how he said the no. We hear no and we say, okay, I'm done. Deal's done. It's over. But he's looking at it like, no, he even says, try to rethink the word no. It could mean, I'm not ready yet to agree. You're making me uncomfortable. I don't understand. I want something else. I need more information. No doesn't necessarily just mean no. They're trying to just stop you. And you have to try to think, what is actually happening here? Are they saying no, like, I don't want to hear anymore, I'm done, I'm not doing this? Or it's just a stopping point, let's pause for a minute. And that's huge too, because we hear no and we think, oh, okay, so it's overcoming that and thinking there's something going on. And then it can go back to what you were talking about earlier, saying, how can we make this work? What doesn't work for you? And then they can explain more, and then you can continue in the process, not just no, okay, I guess we're done. And
Yeah,
yeah, I
you're
like, that's all the sales training is. There's a book called Getting to Yes. That was like the big thing. Just get all the yeses. Don't you do this? Don't. It's like you get these things from your whatever your political party is, and they say, don't you feel this way? Don't you feel this way? Yes, 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 yes. Okay, send us $200. And it's that same technique because you're saying yes to all the questions. And that's
Yeah,
old
when you
school.
yeah, when you allow a client to say no to a question, that creates that safety for them. They feel better, more comfortable moving forward with you. All right, so we've talked about client calling in or prospect calling in, and also you placing a call out to a client or prospect. So there's some of these techniques: establishing rapport, creating empathy, having the client say no to create that safety. And then, ultimately what's the goal is, as sort of as Steve had mentioned a little bit earlier, the goal is that's right. That's right. Not you're right, but that's right. So in other words, creating a situation where a client is comfortable discussing something with you, you successfully validate their feelings and provide to them a solution to ultimately to help them, right? And you get the "that's right" response from a client. Okay, that's sort of the ultimate goal that you're searching for. And I'll give you I have a story to relate. I recently got a phone call. It was a referral, and I was told two things when they called. And one was, "We are looking for a fiduciary." Okay, check the box. I'm a registered investment advisor, got that. Second thing is, "We're not looking for anyone to manage our money." Okay, I'm not sure what I'm gonna be able to do for you in that case, but, maybe I can give you some advice. I don't know. So I said, "Okay," rather than battling that out right at that moment, I decided, "You know what? Just send me all of your information, all your statements, whatever you have, your Excel spreadsheet of, your income and your expenses, whatever you have. Just send me everything. I'll take a look, and then we can get together, have a phone call, and kinda go over everything once I've wrapped my arms around it." So they sent me all the information, and I was able to go through and get a feel for what they had, and again, wrap my arms around everything that they had in terms of their investments and sort of what their goals were. So I called them up, set up a time to talk. When I called, first thing I said was, "Is this a bad time to talk?" They said no. So we got that got that out of the way, try to create that safety. And then again, it was all about building rapport and trying to understand their situation. And basically they're, 55, they're dealing with parents that are older and, starting to have some medical problems and inheritance and all of that, right? Estate planning situation. They've got a son that's getting ready to go off to college. So they're kind of being squeezed on both ends, right? They're feeling a lot of pressure. Retirement now is something that they can, visibly see because it's less than 10 years away, they hope. So the pressure is really, really ramped up on them right now. They've got all these responsibilities. They don't feel like they're making enough money or they have enough money saved for retirement. So it's a matter of going through with them step by step and acknowledging all of those feelings that they have, right? And that you understand what they're going through. You empathize with them. You are are certainly aware of everything that they have and the potential pitfalls. I was able to point out a couple of things to them, and within a short period of time, they're asking me to manage their money. And again, this was a conversation that started out with, "I don't want you to manage my money," right? So that's a successful negotiation, if you will, a successful conversation where I was able to move that prospect to become a client simply by following these basic steps of establishing rapport and empathizing with them and understanding what they're going through and that I could be of assistance to help them attain their goals. And that was the phrase that I heard from him. "That's right. That's right. You understand what I'm going through." And ultimately, people want to work with somebody that they feel understands them and gets them and is like them.
Yeah, and that's the big key. That was one of the huge takeaways from the book. And there were two stories in the book. about getting to the "that's right" phrase. So one was, it's a long story, but I'll shorten it down. Chris Voss was training counterterrorism people in the Philippines to deal with, they've had some terrorist activity there for decades. So they had a Californian that was kidnapped in the middle of a jungle. And they were helping the chief negotiator for the Filipino anti-terrorism force to negotiate the release of this Californian. And this guy was being trained on all these techniques, and he wanted to get the terrorist to get to the "that's right" phrase. So he kept, this took days, weeks, in fact. So he kept going through this mirroring process. It sounds like you're saying this, or what is it about this that's not going to work for you? And he kept going through this whole process. Finally, the guy let down his guard so much that he said, "That's right." When he finally said, "Sounds like you're looking for this, sounds like you want this." And he finally said, "That's right," and left down his guard. Fortunately for the Californian, the whole camp let down their guard and he escaped. And then the Filipino task force came in and actually shot and killed the terrorist. And the other guy had already escaped, but he got him to say, "That's right." And even though the guy was a hard-edged guy, and he kept coming back like you would see in television shows where he's making demands, he's very angry and rage filled and all this stuff, but he got his way.
Yeah, and again, emotion plays a huge role in decision making, a much more prominent role than I think most of us give credit for. There were a few other within the book, a few other negotiating techniques that played on emotion, that used our sort of our natural way of feeling about situations. And I think they're worth us bringing up. And some of these may be applicable in terms of dealing with clients. Some of them may be applicable just in overall, everyday life. And so the two that come to mind, one has to do with how to give somebody bad news, and then the second one is a negotiating technique called anchoring. So let's first, I'll talk about how to give somebody bad news. Really, what you want to do is you want to put it out there immediately and let it sink in for a quick second that you have bad news to tell the person. So, for example, if they gave an example, Chris gave an example in the book where he had screwed up and he needed to call somebody and tell them, "Hey, look, I messed up, right? I screwed up here." So what he did was he called the guy on the phone, and he doesn't even say who it is. He just immediately says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." And then he waits and he says it again, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." And then the guy's like, "Is this Chris?" Yep. And so it's like a sense of humor, right? But it immediately tells the person on the other end of the phone, there's bad news, right? I've got bad news for you. And so they're able to sort of prepare their body, prepare their mind to take in the bad news. And then you can let them know, immediately what's going on. Another way is just to simply call somebody up and say, "Hey, look, I've got some bad news and you're not going to like." You can pause for a couple of seconds and their mind's going to start turning about, okay, all these horrible, awful things that they're going to be told. And then when you tell them, it might not be quite as bad as what their instant thought was. So that's one way of, again, a couple ways of delivering bad news to people, and a technique that I think, I've used personally. I think it's useful. People can accept bad news, but it's better if you just give it to them straight as opposed to trying to beat around the bush and do things that way. The other the other technique from the book is anchoring, and this is in a negotiating tactic, and that is it's called putting an extreme anchor. So if you're dealing with a price on something, for example, you can put an extremely high or an extremely low number out there as an anchor. And what that does to the person on the other end is it's going to reset their thought process as to what's the range that we're dealing with, right? Because if you come in and suppose this range here, you started out here, they're going to immediately shift a bit in your direction, right? Doesn't mean you're going to end up settling on this extreme anchor price, right? But it at least will shift them in that direction immediately to let them know, okay, we're going to move in that direction. We've all probably been on the other end of that, trying to buy a car
Yeah.
or trade in a car, and you go in and you ask them for what's the price, you're going to get for this trade in, and you're thinking in your mind, okay, 15 to 17,000, and they come back and they say, well, we'll give you 9,500. And you're like, what? And immediately you're like, well, geez, if I can get 11 or 12, I'm going to be super happy. Right. But a minute earlier, you were thinking 15 to 17. Right. So it shifts your range, right, immediately. So that technique, again, we've all probably had it used on us, but that's something that can be actively used in negotiating salaries or purchase prices for things, or if you want to sell something. I think that's definitely an effective technique.
Yeah. And I love this. I love this other area that they talked about called showing fairness. And that kind of ties into what you just said, because you want to think that you're getting a fair deal, a fair shake. So they tell this great story about Disney going to Robin Williams and wanting him to do the voice of Aladdin, the genie in Aladdin. And if you've seen that movie, I know when we had kids growing up, must have watched that movie 30 times, but he made the movie. I mean, his voice and what they did with the animation for his character was just hysterical. And I'm sure he ad-libbed some of it, but because he had kids, when Disney approached him with, "Hey, can you do the voice of the genie?" He was thinking, "Oh, this would be so awesome to do for my kids. Sure, I'll do it. I'll forget my usual fee. I'll do it for $75,000." So he comes in because he's thinking it's some, rinky dink old school Disney animation. It's not going to make any money. It'll just be cute for young children. Well, that movie goes on to make $500 million, and Robin Williams is enraged. He is so angry because he feels like this was so unfair, even though he's the one that threw the fee out there. But now all of a sudden it's flipped where this is so unfair. He's furious at Disney and he goes ballistic. And they go back and forth and they're thinking, okay, but you told us 75, we get it. They ended up giving him a Picasso painting worth $1 million just to show, hey, you know what? I know you came out with this number and we accepted it. And we thought, we're probably going to make a ton of money on this movie. And we didn't really share all that information, but we love you. We love the work you do. We want to keep working with you in the future. Here's $1 million Picasso. So he felt good about that because figured they understood him and they acknowledged his anger, and they didn't want to lose him as a big star. So they offered him this olive branch to say, hey, you know what? We're not trying to rip you off here. Let's make this right. So I just thought that was a great story because you can never be too careful when you're negotiating things.
For sure. Yeah. Tons of great stories in the book. Again, a very, very impactful book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up, Steve?
I think just he talks a lot about the calibrated questions
Oh,
and
okay.
how to talk about, I mentioned it about we have your son that he talks about at the beginning of the book. And he keeps saying to them, how am I supposed to do that? And he keeps saying, you want this $1 million. How am I supposed to get that kind of money right now? How am I supposed to do that? I don't even know if he's still alive. And he keeps asking these calibrated questions to get them to solve his problems. So it's a gentle version of saying no, but you're not saying no, I'm not going to give you $1 million. You're just saying, how am I supposed to do that? And I've used that in real life. I can't remember if it was at an airport with a check-in problem or what, but that phrase, how am I supposed to do that, really works magic. And it helps you put aside your ego and you're just saying, hey, tell me how am I supposed to do that? And it puts the onus on them. Now, all of a sudden, they have to come up with a solution for you.
Yeah, and I
Because-
think that helps them, the other person, to redefine maybe what they're asking
Oh
for,
yeah, exactly.
and to maybe reconsider about how doable what they're asking is, right? Because if you're, again, not saying no, but you're saying, okay, tell me how I'm supposed to do that, right? Explain it to me, and I think that that's definitely a great negotiating technique.
Yeah. But overall, book was fantastic. Highly recommend it. And you can apply it to all kinds of situations in your lives with your spouse, with your kids, and of course, with clients and prospects.
All right, well, excellent. Again, thank you to everybody for tuning in. We'll look for more episodes of the Advisor Podcast throughout 2025. We expect 2025 to be a fantastic year for us, and we hope it's profitable for all of you as well.
Thank you for listening to the Advisor Club podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Optimus Advisory Group. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is for financial professionals only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding investing.